My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This show is called Commotion. So look, since the war in Gaza started, we've had a lot of conversations on this show about how that conflict is impacting the world of arts and entertainment. But among musicians in particular, the discourse on the crisis in Gaza has hit new levels in terms of who's speaking up, in terms of the kind of rhetoric that they're using, and also the repercussions that they are facing. Today, I'm joined by John Kameel Farah, a Palestinian-Canadian composer based in Toronto and Berlin. Lux Alptraum is an Israeli-American culture writer in New York. I'm Justin Patch is a professor of music at Vassar College. Hello to all of you. How's it going?
Hey.
Hi.
Good, thank you.
I'm grateful that you guys are all here. Thank you so much for doing this. Listen, I want to start this conversation with a clip from one of the biggest concert tours of this summer.
Welcome from Brazil, welcome from Romania, so many places. Welcome from Palestine, always. And in answer, we love all people, so you're welcome from everywhere, but I'm so happy to see a Palestinian flag. Okay. But just to be clear, we love all people from everywhere. Don't put that on the internet with some bullshit, okay?
So that is Chris Martin. He's acknowledging a Palestinian flag waving in the crowd at a Coldplay concert. Obviously, at this point, not the biggest headline out of a Coldplay concert. That's kind of been eclipsed a few times by another story. But in the meantime, John, I maybe want to start by talking about how careful Chris Martin is being in that moment. You know, his words, he's kind of worried about how they might be framed online. How much stock do you put in a musician that famous, that big, using that moment to say, you know what, I want to acknowledge that Palestinian flag?
There are people, I've had conversations with other musicians, and they're like, or other people, just play music. If you're an actor and you're speaking out of what's happening to Palestinians in Gaza, just be quiet and make music or act or whatever. Okay, then let's just go fast forward. Let's say we are X number of years into the future. The genocide is occurring right now, and someone asks you, oh, okay, so you were alive when that happened. You were a professional on stage when that happened. So what did you do? And then if your answer is, oh, I played my music. Mm-hmm. What do you mean? You didn't use your platform to try to spread awareness? Didn't want to try to bring people's attention to it? I don't think I'd be able to look at myself in the mirror if I didn't, at least at some point while I'm on stage, I'm just an experimental musician. I don't have throngs of people like Coldplay or whatever in front of me, but I have 100 people. I can implant some seeds into their mind when they're there, give them something to think about, and then at least have the conversation, know that I did my part. Maybe I didn't bring one extra grain of rice into Gaza by that, but I think it's all a sort of a group effort, and you have to think of the long term. So I absolutely, and also if you speak out, we are all paralyzed by fear. What could happen to our careers? What could happen if we're going to demonstrations? And that's what holds this system of oppression in place. It's what perpetuates everything. If I speak out, then it'll make it a little bit easier for the next person to speak out. It'll make the next person beside them. And that's how it's been with myself. So I think it's extremely important to use your voice in any way to try to spread awareness against injustice.
I think that the thing that strikes me the most about that Coldplay clip, though, Justin, is that Chris Martin didn't say a lot, right? Like that's the thing. It's like in that moment, he's acknowledging a flag, and I do think we were at a place where musicians were quite nervous to do so before, but unwilling to do so before, and now they're maybe a bit more willing to do so. And that was maybe the reaction that people were having in the crowd. People sort of like a big yell, big cheer as he acknowledged the Palestinian flag. You're a professor who's written and thought a lot about this intersection of music and politics. And in moments like this one, do you look to musicians to speak up? Like, is that something that you ask of someone who has a platform?
I actually don't. I have deep discomfort with requiring artists who we love because they do one thing to then do another thing. And I'm like, hey, man, there's such a thing as experts. And there is such a thing as a political, social, and economic history that there are people who know a lot about these things. And maybe we should try putting a microphone in front of one of them instead of asking, Chris Martin, who I'm sure is a wonderful human being and is a great songwriter and a great musician, but maybe not the most astute and comprehensive political thinker. And that's fine. Let Chris Martin be Chris Martin. And I think one of the lessons you take from looking at the civil rights movement is there are a lot of artists that were not seen as movement artists, And then you start digging in and you find that they contributed a huge amount of money, and that they took young movement artists and they shepherded them through and got them bigger audiences and let them open up shows for them and did all these other things that didn't really seem like movement activism, but were actually really important in terms of getting these artists and their message into larger circles. Like now we think about Harry Belafonte as this incredible movement artist, right? And it turned out that early in his career, when he was a huge crossover success, he was donating a ton of money and spending a lot of his personal time working with these artists that nobody knew about. And it wasn't until much later in the 60s then he was performing for these fundraisers and doing all this kind of stuff. I think Aretha Franklin falls into that category as well, where she did a lot of fundraisers and pro bono concerts. And so we don't think about her the same way we think about Nina Simone. But she was very, very active in those circles. And those are just two like sort of household names,
right?
That did that thing where they used their influence, not necessarily their platform, but their influence to support civil rights.
So the thing that I'm sensitive to is if you're watching a musician, if you're watching an artist and you say, I really connect with that person's work, I really connect with what that person has to say about the world and their vision of the world, I could imagine it being relatively cathartic for you, you know, if that musician sort of says a thing that mirrors the thing that you're feeling. And just to give us a sense of how far the goalposts have shifted in this conversation, I just want to quickly play you guys this clip right here.
Artists for ceasefire, peace in the world.
So that's Annie Lennox, and she is giving her tribute to Sinead O'Connor at the Grammys February 2024 with a call for ceasefire in Gaza. And that night, she was the only person on that stage to do that. Fast forward to the summer, I don't think you can turn in any direction without finding a bunch of artists who are doing that, right? Like I think we've seen Olivia Rodrigo, Billie Eilish, Gracie Abrams, Lana Del Rey. They've all sort of talked about the starvation and the death that's happening in Gaza right now. And then you go to major concerts, you go to Coldplay, you go to big outdoor festivals, and then you just see it's very common now to see a lot of Palestinian flags. Lex, I want to give it to you here. What do you make of the way that the Palestinian cause has become much more common to see and much more mainstream, specifically through the advocacy of musicians?
I mean, I think it's great. I think we should always want people speaking out against injustice. I think that it is really wonderful that we are seeing artists use their platform to raise awareness, to hopefully encourage people to take further action. I mean, I think we can all see that a lot of awareness has been raised and it hasn't necessarily changed things. The conditions in Gaza have consistently gotten worse over the past 2 years, even as we're seeing more awareness. But I think just to kind of echo what Justin said, one of the things that I find troubling is when it's not like, oh, we're really glad that this person who is passionate about this or who cares about this or who was moved is now using their platform to speak out. But when it suddenly becomes this mandate to say, if you don't speak out against this, I know that you are a bad person who loves genocide. And I just to sort of to pull a little bit from my personal life, in addition to being granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, my brother-in-law's mother is from Tigray, which definitely a few years ago was subject to a genocide, possibly currently is. Like what is happening in Tigray doesn't really get covered. Similarly with Sudan, very little coverage. I don't feel comfortable saying that the people around me or celebrities who I don't know are evil people because they have not spoken out against Tigray, because they have not spoken out against Sudan. I think there's so much awful going on at all times. And I think we should absolutely do what we can to mitigate that. But at the same time, there's not enough bandwidth for everything that's awful. And I think sometimes we're then picking and choosing in a way that personally makes me feel uncomfortable. Not because I'm upset that someone's speaking out about Gaza. I want to be very, very clear. I'm very happy when people are speaking out about Gaza because I want the famine to end. I want the genocide to end, all of that. But to then say, oh, this person didn't speak out about Gaza, therefore they're evil. To me, that's like, well, who spoke out about Tigray? Who spoke out about this? Like, To me, it's much better to amplify and support and cheer about the people who are standing up for injustice than to make assumptions about the people who are not.
I want to bring us back to the current musician scene, right? Because I do think that like this is playing out both in terms of like our relationships to those musicians, but it's also playing out on stages, right? And that's having different consequences for the discourse itself. Because now we're talking. Sometimes we end up talking about certain artists more than we were talking about what's actually happening in Gaza. And one of the big examples of this is like there's two artists currently on the front lines of pro-Palestinian activism. Let's listen to this.
Chucky or la, get the breads out loud. A one-way ticket, please. I've lost my bus pass. It's Jackson on these rockets of pins, man. The Kylie flick off freaking this man.
Loves a chicken korma, but hates the hands that cook it. Pinch a cheeky bottom, says there's never harm in looking. Take him anywhere, and you'll regret you ever took him. Away to Spain again. The lads just
Okay, so what you're listening to right now is a mixture. Like first you heard HOOD by the Irish trio Kneecap, and then He's a Man by the British duo Bob Vylan. And both of these artists have been in the news a lot for their stances on the war in Gaza. I'm just going to give a quick rundown here for people who maybe didn't get a chance to catch it. First, Kneecap faced significant criticism for projecting various messages at their Coachella performance in April, including F Israel, Free Palestine. And then band member Mo Chara faced terrorism charge in the UK after a video surfaced of him holding up a Hezbollah flag at a concert last year. That charge was dropped last month. Kneecap issued a statement saying they don't support Hezbollah or Hamas and that we condemn all attacks on civilians always. And then in June, Bob Vylan, which is Bob Vylan with a Y, made international headlines at the Glastonbury Festival in England because the duo led the audience in a chant of death to the IDF. That led to the band getting dropped by their agents from festivals and having their tour visas revoked to the United States. Some Canadian politicians and Jewish advocacy groups are seeking to have both Bob Vylan and Kneecap barred from entering Canada, which is quite something. So, John, when you sort of see, these stories and this idea of like people who've been you're someone who's been actively involved in grassroots fundraising efforts for Gaza here in Toronto. What do you make of the space that stories like Bob Vylan's story and Kneecap's story have kind of taken up in the discourse?
I just think, what is the end result of all this? What's the effect, rather than getting caught up in accusations about what was said on whatever stage on this subject? And I think what it ultimately does is put people struggling against oppression on the defensive. Makes us have to explain every single thing that we say so that the conversation is distracted from the thing that's being struggled against. So we can't fill out application permits for every single person. There's going to be people that voice things. Of course, I have my own ideas at protests. When I hear certain slogans being shouted, actually, I know the intention behind the slogans, but I'm a practically minded person. I don't want to give the system of oppression that would perpetuate a genocide, ethnic cleansing, and occupation a chance. Of course, it's going to use every chance that they get, something that could be not optimally worded to twist something. So I'm very cautious about that. I look at it as going in with my activism with a scalpel rather than a sledgehammer. But this whole thing is like playing a game of just backing us against the ropes so that we always have to defend. Like one example that comes to mind when I think of Bob Vylan specifically, there was a song, I don't know who wrote the song, who recorded it, but I know that it was a very popular song in the struggle against apartheid. Shoot the Boer, shoot the farmer. And this is also a rallying song for the economic freedom fighters, who are a huge party in South Africa even now. And getting so caught up in that song and in certain slogans, it slows down. The Titanic is sinking, and we're debating how to, how to lay out the cutlery. And I just feel that the whole conversation, even now, is. I want to circle back. We need to. There has to be a place for rage. There has to be a place for speaking out, and people do it in this way, do it in that way. I just feel like this is all a distraction from that.
I think the thing that has struck me so much has been the number of headlines that I've seen about Bob Vylan. I think Bob Vylan became 25 times more famous because of the conversation about Bob Vylan. So I just want to say, in response to that set, the Glastonbury Festival issued a statement. This was a statement. We're appalled by the statements made from the stage by Bob Vylan yesterday. Their chants very much crossed the line, and we are urgently reminding everyone involved in the production of the festival that there's no place at Glastonbury for anti-Semitism, hate speech, or incitement to violence. Justin, I want to say, like, you were in Europe. You were in Europe when this actually happened. How did you interpret that message? How do you interpret this reaction from Glastonbury?
I mean, I look, I'm a music guy. I'm a culture guy. Culture is important. Music is important. It has real effects on people's lives. Great, cool. You know who has bigger effects on people's lives? The government. So the government getting bent out of shape about culture, to me, is a kind of blame game. We're like, oh, whatever this musician says or what this artist does or what this theater company is doing is really dangerous. You know what's really dangerous? Government, right? And so I understand if ordinary citizens are like, hey, man, that kind of pushes the line. I'm all for that. Talk about it, be about it, communicate about it. That's fine. I just look at when the state goes to an underground punk group and says you're threatening order, that to me seems really childish.
That's the function of punk, if you will, right?
Yeah.
That's the function of like what culture is actually supposed to do, in a sense.
Yeah, and then so for me, it's like I understand if people are upset. I understand if the Glastonbury Festival has to protect its brand.
Yeah.
I don't understand the British, Canadian, and American governments getting bent out of shape about a punk performance that lasted 45 minutes at Glastonbury.
Lux, after that set, Bob Vylan issued a statement that reads in part, "We are not for the death of Jews, Arabs, or any other race or group of people. We are for the dismantling of a violent military machine, a machine that has destroyed much of Gaza." When you hear that statement from Bob Vylan, how does that sit with you, Lux?
I mean, it's fine. I will say my frustration with a lot of this, like, I don't think saying that the IDF is anti-Semitic. And there's a lot of, I think, problems, obviously, with conflating the IDF with all of Jews and all of that. What troubles me is not like, oh, they're anti-Semites. It's, to me, I'm like, okay, here are people who are not stakeholders in this, who are calling for more violence in a situation that has been increasingly escalating violence. And I just feel like I keep hearing people being like, oh, if only we do like more violence or this violence the right way, like that'll bring peace. And that's not working. It has not worked. And it is bizarre to me that we treat a statement like death to the IDF as being in any way similar to ceasefire now. Like, those are wildly different political views calling for wildly different things. Like, calling for a ceasefire, calling for an end to violence is completely separate from calling for death to or the eradication of what people are going to hear. Like, even if you don't hear it as Jews, I mean, I understand why Israelis are going to hear it as like, oh, you're calling for the death of all Israelis. Like, as I'm sure everybody here knows, military service is mandatory in Israel. People who are now resisting, there's increasing numbers of young people resisting, they go to prison. But the culture of the country is such that, yeah, people see themselves as the IDF. There's high trust in the IDF because they're like, the IDF is me and my friends. I don't fully understand it because I largely grew up in America, but that is the part of the national culture. And so, I remember shortly after October 7th, people were like, well, it's actually fine to kill babies in Israel because they're all just going to grow up to be IDF soldiers. And it's fine, actually, to kill. There's no civilians in Israel because they're all in the IDF. And like, I can understand plausibly how someone would hear death to the IDF as saying death to all Israelis. And to me, when I hear that, I'm like, that's Benjamin Netanyahu logic. That's the same shit that the Israeli right and the genocidal segment of the Israeli population talks about Palestinians in the exact same way that I hear people talk about Israelis and the IDF. And to me, it's like, none of this is helping anyone. Like, and especially like, violent resistance from Palestinians, I understand, but why are you, as a punk band who is completely disconnected from this, throwing more fuel on the fire? And as we've noted, distracting from Gaza, not actually bringing attention to it, just creating this whole side discussion about Bob Vylan and anti-Semitism that isn't even anti-Semitism.
I want to bring us back. I want to bring us back again to the ways that we are sometimes fairly, sometimes unfairly, sort of loading artists with the responsibility and the ask of communicating how we feel, right? Communicating something about how we feel. Because I do think that, like, you know, on the one hand, there's a Bob Vylan and Kneecap conversation. But on the other one, we've obviously seen some of the older artists receive a lot of criticism over how they've responded to the moment. For example, after not saying anything about Gaza since the war started, Tom York of Radiohead broke his silence with a statement that was condemning Israel's actions in Gaza and the West Bank, as well as Hamas's actions on October 7th. And then, you know, also critiquing the current culture of, quote, social media witch hunts on either side, pressuring artists and who they feel like that, you know, they feel like that, you know, they have to make a statement that week. This person, Anthony Fantano, who like posted this 18-minute video on YouTube saying, hey, Tom York's statement is pathetic. I just want to play really quickly a real quick clip of Anthony Fantano's response. Let's hear it.
Tom's solution is that we need to have a face-to-face debate and just pray it all goes away and through completely unknown means vanquish the extremists into the darkness, which just kind of sounds like some BS coming out of a fantasy novel, which I suppose is fitting because it's a fantasy that Tom's mindset here is actually going to change anything for the better.
What do you make of the amount of conversation that Tom York's statement and then like the very forceful pushback to Tom York in the wake of his statement gotten, John?
I read his statement, and I mean, just my eyes were spinning. It was quite pretzely. I mean, you know, it's this quagmire that slows down the conversation. I really was like, what is he actually really saying? He's sort of throwing around the blame to all sides. It's about everybody sort of getting along. Why are people attacking me? He was sort of fronting his own emotions and his own sensitivities above things, how much he's suffering mentally from the criticism of that. So I just feel again, it's all becoming about each particular person. Radiohead has been kind of, to me, what you call PEP, like Progressive Accept Palestine. So on all issues that where, let's say, the fight has been largely won, by and large, in our society, that we've moved forward, and that there's no stakes, there's no courage, there's no sacrifice that's involved, then you can be a liberal, you can be all for it when it's already been sort of decided en masse. But this is something that requires, I think, that people should be outspoken against it. But I just don't really know what to say about Tom York specifically, because he's sort of saying nothing. And I know that also in the act of saying nothing about it is perpetuating the status quo. So that's kind of, it's like if you're not actively speaking out against something, and the subject's been put to him specifically, means he's sort of, in a way, in effect, perpetuating what's already happening.
I think there's something that happens over time, Justin, in terms of the idea of like, hey, the way that people talked about this thing during that period of time, it gets solidified and simplified into maybe one thing, or kind of like a relatively simple sort of narrative. And I'm conscious of that. I'm conscious of that because I think we're watching that unfold a little bit. We went from a period of time where very few musicians were willing to say Free Palestine wherever, to quite a few of them saying, you know what, actually we're quite comfortable saying this, and it feels uncomfortable for us to not say that anymore. And I guess maybe before we close out this conversation, this kind of comes back to the history of protests in music in general, and the tendency to sort of romanticize all the sort of like classic music from the 60s about the Vietnam War. But, you know, like in their time, it's not like those artists were, you know, like they would put out those songs and everyone would go like, yes, thank you for this. Like they were quite controversial, right? Like those songs would be received with some controversy. So what does history tell us about how maybe we'll think about this moment in the future?
Well, I also, just on Tom York, I find it's comical that we love Tom York because he centers his own emotions and is upfront with them. And then we're mad at him for centering his emotions on this issue. It seems like, okay, that doesn't make any sense to me. But on the history of protest music, The romanticism of protest music has always bothered me. As people were like, when I was working with the anti-war movement in Texas, they were like, the music did all this sort of stuff. And like, no, the music didn't do that. The music was part of a larger ecosystem that brought people together. It brought issues up, but it also brought people together in a way that then other organizers could talk about, how do you escape the draft? Like, how do you protest? How do you do civil disobedience? How do we try to force the issue of integration, right? All of these things, and music was a great catalyst for that. It was a great catalyst for bringing people together, putting them in places where then speeches could happen, conversations could happen, people could meet new people and do all that kind of stuff. And music and art and theater and film are really important as part of a larger solution, but they don't do that on their own. And I think what we're missing here when we romanticize protest music in the 60s are the really human, political, pragmatic connections that need to be made in order for a movement to have efficacy.
Justin, are you saying that they didn't just write a bunch of songs and therefore policy change? Is that what you're telling me right now?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's it's an important and useful thing to remember. Having said that, it's a lever that we pull. It's a lever that we pull, especially as an emotional outlet. Lux, I want to give you sort of a moment to comment on this idea of like, how do you think we'll remember this period of time of A, the expectations we put on musicians, which is what we're asking of them, but also B, the ways that they maybe responded to those expectations?
I mean, I hope that we spend more time focusing on the people who spoke out, focusing on the people who were creating movements like Artists for Ceasefire. We're driving things forward. We're pushing forward the conversation. I hope we spend more time talking about Rami. I'm blanking on his last name. Rami Youssef?
Yeah.
From the show Rami, who has, really eloquently and really beautifully spoken out about this and organized people. I hope we're focused more on that than on what Tom York said. Because like, I feel like there's pressure. Oh, Tom York isn't saying something. Tom York has to say something. Tom York says a statement that is probably authentic to what he feels. And now we have an 18-minute video about why Tom York said things that weren't the things he should have said, instead of, focusing on who are the artists who are saying the things that are moving things forward and drawing attention, and who are the artists who do get what's going on. And I find that so much more important than Tom York's statement.
John, maybe last word to you here. When you think about the role of artists right now, since I take Justin's point, they can't move policy forward. They can't resolve this. What is it, the thing that you're hoping an artist can do? Not must do, but maybe can do. What is the role of the artist right now?
Bring attention to. So the last piece, whenever I play concerts now, at every concert, I finish my concert. It's usually very energetic, goes in a whole bunch of different directions. I can have a piece about Palestinian olive trees, talking about what's specifically happening to olive groves being decimated, the symbolism of, and it's actually played with, I'm a visual artist as well, so I have an animation, a stop animation of me drawing an olive tree that's playing in the background, about a song of a sample from a singer who is speaking about returning home, returning to our home, the longing of return, and also the symbolism of Palestinian olive trees of resilience and connectedness to the land and taking care of something that's going to be, that was there many centuries or millennia before you, and also will continue to be there long after you're gone. So bringing attention to that. But then I finished the concert off with a piece called simply Lullaby for the Children of Gaza. And that's just the title. So I don't say anything. I just say the title and I play the piece. And I end on that note. And that's bringing people into a certain zone. The title says all it needs to say, and their emotions are what they remember. And that is, that's another form of activism. That I can leave the audience with something. And I feel that's the most potent thing that I can do.
I want to say thank you to all of you for bringing your attention to this conversation and handling it with sensitivity and care. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks for
much
having me.
appreciated. Thank you. Thank you. Justin Patch is a professor of music at Vassar College. He was in Poughkeepsie, New York. John Kameel Farah is a Palestinian-Canadian composer based in Toronto and Berlin. He was right here with me in studio. And Lux Alptraum is a culture writer based in New York City. In the meantime, my name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This show is called Commotion. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.